Welcome to Midnight Truth, where peaceful stories guide you into the perfect night's rest. Before we start, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps me bring more soothing stories to you and others who need them. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, find your cozy spot, close your eyes, and let's begin this calming journey together. I pulled up the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a dull orange that made the place look even older than it was. My new home, a two-story relic with chipped paint and sagging shutters, sitting at the edge of town like it didn't quite belong. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with character, which I guess was her way of saying it was cheap and falling apart after the divorce. Cheap was all I could afford. A fresh start, that's what I told myself. New town, new job, new me. The house was just part of the deal. The moving truck rumbled behind me, and I waved the driver off after he helped me unload the basics. A mattress, a few boxes of clothes, some kitchen stuff. I'd figure out the rest later. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something sour as I stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under my boots, loud enough to make me wince. Old houses make noise, I thought. No big deal. Inside wasn't much better. The living room had peeling wallpaper, yellowed with age, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been lit in decades. The kitchen had a rusty sink and cabinets that groaned when I opened them. Upstairs, the bedroom was small but livable, with a single window facing the backyard. I dropped my mattress in the corner and called it a night. The rest could wait. The first few days were quiet, mostly. I started my new job at the hardware store downtown, nothing fancy, just stocking shelves and helping customers find nails or paint. It was a good distraction from the mess I'd left behind. Court dates, lawyers, Sarah's cold stare across the table. Here, nobody knew me, and I liked it that way. I'd come home exhausted, heat up a can of soup, and crash on the mattress while the house settled around me. The creaks and groans didn't bother me much. Old places have quirks, right? The wind rattling the windows, the floorboards popping as the temperature dropped. It was all normal. That first week, I met Clara. She lived next door in a tidy little bungalow that made my place look like a haunted shack by comparison. She was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a habit of talking over a fence while watering her roses. I was hauling a trash can to the curb when she waved me over. "You're the new tenant, huh?" she said, peering at me like I was a stray cat. "Hope you're handy. That house has been empty a while." "Yeah, I noticed," I said, forcing a smile. "It's got character, though." She snorted. "Character is one way to put it. You hear anything strange yet?" I frowned. "Like what?" "Oh, you know." She clipped a dead rosebud and tossed it into her bucket. "Footsteps. Voices. The usual. Last guy who lived there didn't stay long. Ran out one night, screaming about something chasing him. Said the house was cursed." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Probably just drunk, though. People make up stories." I nodded, unsure what to say. Curse? That sounded like small-town gossip, the kind of thing bored folks cooked up to scare newcomers. "Well, I haven't heard anything yet. Just creaks." "Give it time," she said, turning back to her roses. "Old houses talk." I brushed it off and went back inside. Clara seemed nice enough, if a little nosy. Still, her words stuck with me as I microwaved into that night. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional pop from the floorboards. I ate standing at the counter, staring out the kitchen window into the dark backyard. Nothing out there but overgrown grass and a sagging fence. No footsteps, no curses, just me and my soup. That night, I woke up to the sound. A heavy thud, like something falling upstairs. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. The bedroom was pitch black, the window letting in just enough moonlight to outline the walls. Thud. There was again, louder this time, right above me. The attic. I held my breath. Waiting? Nothing. Probably a raccoon or a loose board. I told myself. Old houses settle. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I checked the attic. There was a pull-down ladder in the hallway, creaky and covered in dust. I climbed up with a flashlight half expecting to find a mess of critters or broken beams. Instead, it was empty, just insulation and cobwebs stretching into the shadows. No raccoon, no fallen boxes, nothing to explain the noise. I shrugged it off and went to work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, the noises got worse. Thuds turned into footsteps, heavy, deliberate ones, pacing back and forth above my bedroom at night. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was the wind or the pipes. But it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like someone walking, slow and steady, right over my head. Once, I swore I heard a low hum, like someone muttering under their breath. But when I sat up, it stopped. I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help much. The house felt different at night. Colder, heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I'd wake up to strange smells, too. Not the damp what I'd noticed when I moved in, but something sharper, like burnt hair or old copper. It'd linger for a few minutes, then vanish. I checked the outlets, the stove, even the fireplace. Nothing. Just the house, playing tricks. By the end of the first week, I was jumpy. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder while making coffee, half expecting someone to be standing there. Nobody was, of course. It was just me and the creaks and the footsteps that wouldn't quit. I told myself I was overreacting. New job, new place, stress from the divorce. It was all messing with my head. That's what I wanted to believe. Anyway, but then I found the scratch marks. The scratch marks in the attic stayed with me all day. I found them that morning after the thudding woke me up again. Faint, jagged lines carved into the dusty floorboards, barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. They weren't deep, just shallow gouges, like something that dragged itself across the wood a long time ago. I ran my fingers over them, half expecting to feel warm or wet, but they were cold and dry, same as the rest of the attic. Probably from an old tenant moving furniture, I told myself. Or maybe a raccoon with sharp claws. That made sense, didn't it? Old houses have history, and history leaves marks. I climbed back down the ladder, brushed the dust off my jeans, and headed to work. The hardware store was busy that day. Spring rush, people buying mulch and paint. So I didn't have much time to think about it. I stocked shelves, hauled bags of soil, nodded at customers asking for screwdriver bits. Normal stuff. But every now and then, my mind drifted back to those scratches. They didn't look random. They were too straight, too deliberate, like someone or something had been up there with a purpose. By the time I got home, the sun was gone and the house loomed dark against the gray sky. I flicked on the porch light, and it buzzed like a dying fly before settling into a dim glow. Inside, the air felt thick, heavier than it should have been for late March. I kicked off my boots and headed to the kitchen, figuring a beer and some leftovers would shake the weird feeling creeping up my spine. The fridge hummed as I pulled out a bottle, and the floor creaked under my socks. Just the house settling, I thought. Same as always. I was halfway through my microwave spaghetti when I heard it again. Thud. Upstairs, right above me. I froze, fork hovering over the plate, listening. Thud. Thud. Slow, heavy, like boots pacing the attic floor. My pulse kicked up, and I set the fork down, straining to hear over the fridge's drone. It wasn't the wind. The night was still outside, no breeze rattling the windows. Thud, thud. I grabbed my flashlight from the counter and headed for the stairs. The hallway was dark, the single bulb flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. I pulled down the attic ladder again, wincing as it squeaked loud enough to wake the dead. The air up there smelled stale, like old paper and something faintly sour. I swept the flashlight beam across the space. Insulation, cobwebs, those damn scratch marks. Nothing else. No raccoon, no fallen boards, no explanation. The thudding had stopped the second I started climbing, like whatever was knew I was coming. I stood there for a minute, heart thumping, waiting for it to start again. Silence. Just the faint creak of the house around me. Get a grip? I muttered, my voice sounding too loud in the empty space. I climbed down, folded the ladder back up, and locked in place. Probably just the house settling. I told myself for the 10th time that week. Old pipes, old wood, old everything. That's all it was. But that night, the noises didn't stop at thuds. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling with the bedside lamp on, when I heard something new. Tap, tap, tap. Light, quick, like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the wall behind my headboard. I sat up, twisting around to look. Nothing there but faded wallpaper and a couple cracks in plaster. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed my ear to the wall, holding my breath. It stopped. I waited, ear still against the cold surface, but it didn't come back. Just my imagination, I thought. Stress, lack of sleep, whatever. I lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin like a kid scared of the dark. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, and I watched them shift as the bulb flickered. I'd have to replace it soon. Maybe that was it. Bad wiring messing with my head. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but then I felt a cold spot right near my feet, like someone had opened a window and let in a draft. I opened my eyes and sat up again. The window was closed, locked tight, same as always. I reached down, waving my hand through the air. It was frigid, sharp enough to make my fingers ache, but only in that one spot, a foot to the left, and it was warm again. I yanked the blanket tighter around me, staring at the foot of the bed. The cold faded after a minute, leaving me shivering and wide awake. Old houses have drafts, I told myself. Bad insulation, that's all. But it didn't feel like a draft. It felt like something had been there, lingering, and then moved on. The next morning, I was dragging. I spilled coffee on the counter, fumbled my keys, barely made it to work on time. My boss, a gruff guy named Mike, noticed. "You look like hell," he said, tossing me a box of screws to sort. "Rough night." "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "New place. Still getting used to it." He grunted. Old houses do that. My first place had rats in the walls. Kept me up for weeks, till I poisoned them. Rats. That could be it. I latched onto the idea like a lifeline. Rats in the attic, tapping on the walls, thumping around. Made more sense than anything else. I decided I'd pick up some traps after my shift, set them up, and be done with it. Problem solved. On my way home, I stopped by Clara's fence again. She was out there, pruning her roses in the fading light, her hands quick and sure with the clippers. I waved, and she squinted at me over the top of her glasses. "You're still alive," she said, smirking. "Guess the house hasn't gotten you yet." I chuckled, but it came out weak. "Not yet. Hey, you ever hear anything weird over there? Like rats or something?" She paused, clippers hovering over a stem. "Rats? No, can't say I have." "Why, you got noises." "Yeah, some thumping upstairs. Thought it might be critters." She tilted her head, studying me. Could be, or it could be what the last guy heard. He said it started with noises, too. Footsteps, mostly. Said it felt like something was watching him. Kept him up till he couldn't take it anymore. Ran out one night, babbling about eyes in the dark. Sheriff found him a mile down the road, half out of his mind. I shifted on my feet, the traps in my bag suddenly feeling useless. "You said he was drunk, though, right?" "Probably," she said, shrugging. "But he wasn't the first to complain. That house has stories. Always has." "Stories like what?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. "Oh, tenants hearing things, seeing things. One lady swore the walls moved, like they were breathing. Most folks don't last long. Guess you're tougher than they were." She grinned, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching me. I forced a smile. "Guess so. Thanks, Clara." "Anytime," she said, turning back to her roses. "Let me know if you catch those rats." I walked back to my place, her words rattling around in my head. Footsteps, eyes in the dark, breathing walls. It was ridiculous. Small-town nonsense, like she'd said. But as I stepped inside and the door creaked shut behind me, the house felt different. Quieter, but not in a good way. Like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to do something. I set the traps that night. One in the attic near the scratch marks, one in the bedroom corner, one by the basement stairs. I baited them with peanut butter. the smell cutting to the faint sourness in the air. If it was rats, I'd hear the snap soon enough. If it wasn't, I didn't let myself finish that thought. Sleep didn't come easy. I left the lamp on again, the light pooling on the floor like spilled water. The house was silent for a while, long enough that I started to drift off. Then tap, tap, tap. The wall again, right behind me. I jolted upright, staring at the plaster. It went on for a few seconds. Tap, 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 then stopped. I grabbed a flashlight from a nightstand and shone it on the wall. Nothing, just cracks and peeling paper. I got out of bed, barefoot on the cold floor, and checked the trap in the corner. Empty. No peanut butter, though the bait was gone, licked clean, but the trap hadn't sprung. I frowned, kneeling to reset it. Maybe a smart rat, I thought, one that knew how to dodge the spring. I'd get it eventually. Back in bed, I pulled the covers up and tried to relax. The tapping didn't come back, but the thuds did, slow, heavy footsteps pacing the attic. I lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. They stopped, then started again, circling right above me. I gripped the flashlight, debating whether to go up there. But what would I find? More scratches? More nothing? Then I felt it again, the cold spot, this time near my shoulder, sharp and sudden, like someone had dumped ice water on the bed. I scrambled back, kicking the blanket off, and swung the flashlight around. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement, but it was freezing. I waved my hand through it, and my fingers went numb. What the hell? I whispered, my voice shaking. The cold lingered for a full minute, long enough that I could see my breath puffing out in little clouds. Then it was gone, just like that, leaving the room warm again. I sat there, heart hammering, staring at the empty space where it had been. Not a draft, not rats, something else. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed up, lamp on, flashlight in hand, listening to the house creak and groan around me. The footsteps stopped eventually, but the tapping came back, faint, insistent, like it was trying to tell me something. By the time the sun came up, I was a wreck, eyes burning, hands shaky. I checked the traps again. All empty, all clean, no rats. As I stood in the kitchen, gulping coffee like it was medicine, I couldn't shake Clara's words. Footsteps, eyes in the dark, something watching. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses, old stories, my own tired brain playing tricks. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. The days started blurring together after that. Work, home, lock the doors, lie awake listening. That was my life now. I'd stumble through my shifts at the hardware store, bleary-eyed and jumpy, then drag myself back to the house as the sun sank low. I didn't want to be there, not really, but where else was I going to go? The divorce had cleaned me out, and this creaky old dump was all I had left. So I stayed, telling myself I could handle it. It was just a house, after all, just wood and nails and bad insulation. But it didn't feel like just a house anymore. Not at night. I'd gotten into a routine, sort of, after work. I'd stop at the gas station down the road for a six-pack or a frozen pizza. Anything to avoid spending too much time in the kitchen with its rusty sink and that faint, sour smell that never went away. I'd eat on the couch, TV blaring some sitcom I wasn't really watching, trying to drown out the silence. Then I'd check the locks, front door, back door, windows twice, sometimes 3 times, before heading upstairs. I'd stop sleeping in the bedroom after the cold spot by my shoulder. The couch was safer, closer to the door, easier to run from if I had to. Not that I'd admit that out loud. The noises were part of the routine now. 2. They'd start around midnight. Give or take. First the thuds in the attic. Heavy, plodding footsteps that circled above me like someone was pacing out a map. I'd stare at the ceiling, counting them, waiting for them to stop. They always did, eventually, but never before I'd worked myself into a sweat. Then came the tapping, those quick, sharp raps on the walls, moving from the living room to the stairs to the hallway, like something was testing the house, looking for a weak spot. I'd shine my flashlight at the sound, but there was never anything to see, just plaster and shadows. I'd check the traps every morning, hoping for a dead rat, A snapped neck. Anything to explain it? Nothing. The peanut butter was always gone, licked clean, but the traps stayed empty. I bought bigger ones. The kind Mike said would take out a squirrel. If it had to. Same result. Bait gone, no catch. I started wondering if I was setting them wrong, if my hands were too shaky to get the springs right, or maybe it wasn't rats at all. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe it was something else. That thought kept me up more than the noises did. I'd lie on the couch, blanket pulled tight, lamp glowing on the coffee table, listening. The TV stayed off after a while. It didn't help, and the static between channels started sounding too much like whispers. I'd tell myself it was the house settling, the wind, the pipes. Old places creak, old places groan. But then the new sound started, and those excuses didn't hold up anymore. It was a Thursday night. I think hard to keep track when you're running on fumes. I just locked up, double-checked the front door, and settled onto the couch with a beer. The footsteps kicked off right on schedule, thudding overhead, slow and deliberate. I sipped the beer, trying to ignore them, focusing on the cold bottle in my hand. Then I heard it, a low moan, soft and drawn out, like someone exhaling through a sore throat. It wasn't from the attic. It was downstairs from the basement. I sat up, beer sloshing onto my shirt. The moan came again, louder this time, drifting up through the floorboards. My skin prickled, and I set the bottle down, grabbing the flashlight. The basement door was in the kitchen, a flimsy thing with a loose knob that rattled when you touched it. I hadn't been down there much, just once when I moved in, to check the water heater. It was damp and dark, with concrete walls and a dirt floor in the corners. Nothing worth seeing. But that moan was coming from there, no question. I stood at the top of the stairs, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air smelled wet like rain-soaked earth, mixed with that sharp coppery tang I'd noticed before. "Hello," I called, my voice cracking. Stupid, I know. Who was going to answer? The moan stopped, and the silence pressed in heavy and thick. I took a step down, then another, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight. The beam shook in my hand, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. At the bottom, the basement was empty, just a water heater humming in the corner, a stack of old paint cans, and a puddle where the floor dipped. No one there, nothing to moan. I swept the light around, checking the shadows, half expecting something to lunge out at me. Nothing did. I stood there, breath shallow, waiting. The air felt colder down here, damp against my face, but no cold spots like upstairs, just normal basement chill. I was about to head back up when I heard it again, faint, almost too quiet to catch, a moan low and mournful, coming from the far wall. I aimed the flashlight at it. Bare concrete, cracked but solid, no holes, no vents, nothing to carry sound. I stepped closer, pressing my ear to the wall. The moan stopped, but I felt a faint vibration, like something shifting on the other side. Dirt, maybe, or pipes. I pulled back, wiping my hand on my jeans, and hightailed it upstairs. I slammed the door shut and wedged a chair under the knob, heart pounding like I'd run a mile. Back on the couch, I didn't sleep. The footsteps started up again, louder now, joined by the tapping. Tap, 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 moving from wall to wall. The moan didn't come back, but that didn't make me feel better. I sat there, flashlight clutched like a lifeline, until the sky outside turned gray. When I checked the basement door in the morning, the chair was still in place, but the knob was loose, like someone had jiggled it from the other side. Work was a mess that day. I dropped a box of nails, spilling them across the aisle, and snapped at a customer who asked me where the hammers were. Mike pulled me aside near the break room, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than worried. "You're falling apart, man," he said. "What's going on? You sick or something?" "Just tired," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes, not sleeping great. He squinted at me. "New place still? Thought you'd be settled by now." "Yeah, well, it's loud, creaky. You know how it is." "Get some earplugs," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Or a bottle of whiskey. Works for me." I nodded, managing a weak smile. Whiskey sounded good, but earplugs wouldn't cut it. Not with what I was hearing. I made it through the shift somehow, avoiding everyone, counting the minutes until I could leave. On the way home, I stopped for more traps, bigger ones, with teeth like a bear clamp. If it was rats, I'd catch them. If it wasn't, I didn't let myself think about that. That night, I set the new traps, one in the attic, one by the basement door, one on the couch. I baited them with cheese this time, something stronger, something they couldn't resist. Then I locked up, checked the doors, and settled in. The lamp stayed on. The flashlight stayed close. I waited. The footsteps came first. Same as always, thud, 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 pacing the attic. I stared at the ceiling, gripping the flashlight, willing the trap to snap. It didn't. The tapping followed, sharper now, like someone drumming their nails on a table. It moved from the living room to the kitchen, then back again, circling me. I sat up, shining the light around, but the walls were empty, just cracks and peeling paint. Then the moan started again, low, guttural, rising from the basement. I froze, listening as it stretched out, louder than before, echoing through the floor. The chair was still wedged on the knob, but it rattled anyway, a faint, steady shake. I stood, flashlight aimed at the kitchen, my breath catching in my throat. The moan turned into a scrape, slow, deliberate, like something dragging across concrete. It was coming from down there, no doubt about it. I took a step toward the kitchen, then stopped. The air turned cold. Not a spot this time, but the whole room dropping fast enough to make my teeth chatter. My breath fogged in front of me, thick and white, and the lamp flickered, dimming to a dull orange. The scraping got louder, closer, like it was right under my feet. I backed up, tripping over the coffee table, and landed hard on the couch. The flashlight slipped, rolling across the floor, its beam spinning wildly. And then I saw it, just for a second, in the corner of my eye. A shadow, tall and thin, stretching across the wall near the stairs. Not mine. The lamp was behind me, and the angle was wrong. I scrambled for the flashlight, snatched it up, and swung the beam toward the stairs. Nothing, just the empty hallway, the flickering bulb overhead. The cold lifted, the scraping stopped, and the lamp steadied. Silence. I didn't move for a long time. I sat there, flashlight trained on the stairs, waiting for the shadow to come back. It didn't. The footsteps picked up again, fainter now, like they were moving away. The tapping faded, too, leaving just the hum of the fridge and my own ragged breathing. When the sun finally came up, I checked the traps. Empty. Cheese gone, no blood, no fur. Nothing caught. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the basement door, the chair still wedged tight. The knob wasn't loose anymore. It was cold, colder than the rest of the house, like it had been sitting in a freezer. I yanked my hand back, wiping it on my shirt, and decided I wasn't going down there again. Not today. Maybe not ever. As I poured coffee, hand shaking, I couldn't shake the shadow. It had been there, I was sure of it. Not a trick of the light, not my imagination. Something was in this house with me, and it wasn't rats. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I wasn't sleeping tonight, either. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick, croaking something about a stomach bug to Mike over the phone, and hung up before he could ask questions. My voice sounded like it had been scraped raw, and I hadn't slept more than an hour, maybe two, after the shadow on the stairs. I couldn't face the store. Couldn't face people smiling and asking for paint swatches while my hands shook and my head buzzed with what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. I wasn't even sure anymore. The house was quiet that morning. Sunlight streaming through the grimy windows like nothing had happened. I sat on the couch, coffee going cold in my mug, staring at the basement door. The chair was still wedged under the knob, but it didn't feel like enough. Not after the moan, the scraping, that shadow stretching across the wall. I kept the flashlight close, even in daylight. Its weight the only thing keeping me grounded. The traps were still empty, cheese gone, no catch. I didn't bother resetting them. Whatever was here wasn't getting caught in a spring-loaded box. I needed air, something to clear the fog in my head. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and the spring breeze hit me like a slap. It was warm, normal, a world away from the cold that had gripped the living room last night. Clara was out by her fence, watering her roses with a green hose that dribbled more than it sprayed. She glanced up as I shuffled over, my boot scuffing the cracked sidewalk. "You look like death warmed over," she said, shutting off the nozzle. "Rough night." I leaned against the fence, forcing a laugh that came out more like a cough. "Yeah, you could say that. Didn't sleep much." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "House still talking to you?" "Something like that." I hesitated, rubbing the back of my neck. I didn't want to sound crazy, but Clara had brought up first those stories about the last tenant, the footsteps, the curses. Maybe she knew more. "You ever hear anything from over there? Like moans or scraping?" Her eyebrows shot up, and she set the hose down, wiping her hands on her apron. "Moans, huh? No, can't say I have. Scraping, neither. But I don't sleep with my ear to the wall." "What's it sound like?" "Like something's moving down in the basement," I said, keeping my voice low like the house might hear me. "And last night I thought I saw a shadow on the stairs. Tall, thin, not mine." She didn't laugh, didn't roll her eyes. She just nodded, slow and deliberate, like she'd been expecting this. "You sure it wasn't a trick of the light?" "I don't know." I admitted. It was fast, but the lamp was behind me, and the angle didn't match. And the room got cold, real cold, right before. Clara pursed her lips, glancing over at the house. Its chipped paint and sagging shutters looked almost normal in the daylight, but her expression said she saw something else. "Come over for coffee," she said finally. "You look like you need it, and I've got a pot on. Might as well talk where it's warm." I followed her across the yard, grateful for the excuse to stay out of my place a little longer. Her bungalow was small but cozy, all floral curtains and polished wood, the opposite of my drafty wreck. She poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot on the counter, handed me one, and sat across from me at her kitchen table. The steam smelled strong, grounding, and I wrapped my hands around the mug like it could chase the chill out of my bones. "So," she said, stirring sugar into her cup, "you're hearing things, seeing things. What else?" I took a sip, scalded my tongue but not caring. Footsteps in the attic, tapping on the walls, cold spots that come and go. And the traps I set, they're empty every morning, but the bait's gone. No rats, no nothing. She tapped her spoon against the mug, the clink sharp and the quiet. Sounds like what the last guy went through. Started small, noises, mostly. Then he started talking about shadows, eyes watching him from corners. Said he felt it even in the daytime, like something was waiting for him to let his guard down. I shifted in my chair, the coffee turning sour in my stomach. "You said he was drunk, though, that he ran off screaming about a curse." "He was drunk when they found him," she corrected, leaning back. "Doesn't mean he was when it started. And he wasn't the only one. That house has a history, you know. Goes back to the man who built it, Elias Crow." The name hit me like a jolt. "Who?" "Elias Crow," she repeated, her voice dropping a notch. "Owned the place back in the 40s, maybe 50s. Weird fella, kept to himself. Folks said he was into strange stuff, occult books, rituals, things nobody around here understood. Died in that house, alone. Some say suicide, some say something else got him. Either way, it's been trouble ever since." I set the mug down, my hands unsteady. "Trouble how?" "Tenants," she said simply. "Nobody stays long. One guy in the 70s swore he heard voices telling him to leave. A woman in the 90s said the walls moved, like they were breathing. Another fella, think it was '05, claimed he saw faces in the windows when he was outside looking in. All of them left quick. Your buddy who ran out screaming? Just the latest." I stared at her, trying to process it. Voices, breathing walls, faces. None of that matched what I'd experienced. Not exactly, but it was close enough to make my skin crawl. Why didn't anyone tell me this before I moved in? Clara shrugged. Realtor probably didn't know, or didn't care. House has been empty a while. Cheap rents, all most folks see. And it's just stories, right? Small town gossip. Unless you're hearing moans and seeing shadows, I guess. She smirked. But I didn't smile back. What happened to Elias Crow? You said he died there. How? Nobody's sure, she said, sipping her coffee. Official stories, he hanged himself in the attic. Found him swinging from a beam, rope creaking like the floorboards. But the neighbors back then said they heard screams for weeks after, high-pitched, awful screams, like he was still there. Sheriff checked it out. Found nothing. People figured it was guilt or ghosts. Take your pick. I swallowed hard. Picture in the attic, those scratch marks, the footsteps circling overhead. And the occult stuff? What was he doing? Who knows? She waved a hand. Rumors said he was trying to talk to the dead, maybe more than talk. Had a room full of books with funny symbols, candles burned down to nubs. Folks thought he was crazy, or dangerous. After he died, they cleared most of it out, but the house never shook the reputation. I leaned forward, voice low. You think he did something? Like left something behind? Clara's eyes flicked to mine, sharp and steady. I think old houses hold on to things. Memories, maybe? Or worse. You're the one living there, you tell me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The coffee sat heavy in my gut, and I glanced out her window at the house, its dark windows staring back like eyes. I don't know what's going on, I said finally, but it's not rats. She nodded, like she'd known I'd say that. Be careful, that's all I'll say. If it gets bad, you've got my number. Door's open if you need it. Thanks. I muttered, standing up. I'll figure it out. Hope so, she said, walking me to the door. Just don't wait till you're running down the road screaming. I forced a laugh, but it died fast. Back outside, the house looked bigger, somehow, taller, darker, even with the sun overhead. I went inside, locking the door behind me, and stood in the living room, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no tapping, just a faint hum of the fridge. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The quiet felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. I spent the day avoiding the basement and the attic. Sticking to the couch with the TV on low, I dug out an old photo album from one of my boxes. Pictures of me and Sarah before everything fell apart. It was a distraction, something normal to cling to, but even that didn't help. My eyes kept drifting to the stairs, the ceiling, the basement door. Elias Crow, occult rituals, screams in the night. Clara's words spun in my head, tangling with the noises, the shadow, the cold. By evening, I couldn't sit still. I grabbed the flashlight and checked the house again. Doors locked, windows shut, traps empty. The chair stayed under the basement knob, and I added a heavy box of books on top, just in case. I wasn't sure what I was guarding against, but it made me feel better, even if only for a minute. Night came fast, the sky turning black outside the windows. I settled onto the couch, lamp on, flashlight in hand, and waited. The footsteps started right on time, thud, 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 slow and heavy in the attic. I gripped the flashlight tighter, staring at the ceiling. The tapping followed, quick and sharp, dancing along the walls. I didn't bother shining the light. It never showed anything. Then the moan came again, low and mournful, rising from the basement. I sat up, heart pounding, watching the door. The chair didn't move, but the knob rattled. Once, twice, a faint jiggle like something testing it. The air turned cold, not all at once, but in patches, brushing my arms, my neck, my face. I swung the flashlight around, beams slicing through the dark, but the room was empty. Just me and the noises. The moan stretched out, louder now, joined by that scraping sound, slow, deliberate, dragging across concrete. I stood, backing toward the front door, flashlight aimed at the kitchen. The lamp flickered, dimming, then flared bright again. The scraping stopped, but the moan lingered, fading into a whisper I couldn't make out. Words, maybe, or just my imagination. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, light on, door in sight, listening as the house groaned around me. The footsteps circled, the tapping darted, the moan ebbed and flowed. By morning, I was a wreck, eyes red, hands trembling, coffee doing nothing to steady me. I checked the basement door. The chair was still there, the box untouched, but the knob was ice cold again, frost rhyming the edges like it had been left outside all night. I stood there, staring at it, Clara's voice echoing in my head. Elias Crow. Rituals. Something left behind. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to think I'd moved into a place that wasn't just old but wrong. But the shadow, the cold, the sounds, they weren't tricks of the light or bad wiring. They were real, and they were getting worse. I needed answers. Not from Clara, not from stories. From the house itself. If Elias Crow had done something here, left something here, maybe there was a clue, something to explain it, something to stop it. I just had to find it. Assuming I could survive another night. Here's Chapter 5 of your horror story. Continuing the first-person narrative will focus on suspense, atmosphere, and the protagonist's plunge into the house's dark history. It's approximately 3,000 words as requested and centers on the discovery of Elias Crow's journal, deepening the mystery and pushing the tension higher. Enjoy. Chapter 5, The Discovery. I couldn't keep running on fumes. By the time the sun came up, I was a mess. Hands jittery, eyes burning, head pounding like someone was hammering nails into my skull. The house was quiet again, that deceptive calm it pulled off in daylight. But I wasn't fooled anymore. The footsteps, the tapping, the moans, they weren't tricks or drafts or rats. They were something else, something tied to Elias Crow and whatever he'd done here. Clara's stories had planted the seed, and last night's cold, rattling knob had watered it. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I needed proof. I started in the bedroom. It was the one place I'd avoided since the cold spot by my shoulder, but if Elias had left something behind, some trace of his occult stuff, like Clara said, it made sense to look where I felt it most. The room was bare when I moved in. Just a mattress I dragged up, a rickety nightstand, and that single window overlooking the backyard. I hadn't unpacked much, so there wasn't a lot to sift through. Still, I checked every corner, every crack, flashlight in hand like I was hunting for treasure instead of ghosts. The floorboards creaked under my boots, louder than usual, like the house was complaining about me poking around. I tapped the walls, listening for hollow spots, but they were solid, just plaster and old wood. The closet was empty, a narrow space with peeling paint and a faint musty smell. I was about to give up when I noticed it. A loose board near the foot of the mattress, one corner sticking up like it had been pried loose before. I knelt, wedging my fingers under it, and pulled. It popped up with a groan, revealing a shallow gap beneath. Dust puffed out, making me cough, and I aimed the flashlight into the hole. There was something there, something wrapped in a grimy cloth, tucked against the joists. I reached in, heart thumping, and pulled it out. The cloth was rough, stained brown in spots, and it smelled like damp earth and something sharper, like burnt matches. I unfolded it carefully, and a small book slid into my lap, leather-bound, edges frayed, no title on the cover. The pages were yellowed brittle, and when I opened it, the handwriting hit me like a punch. Tight, slanted scrawl, ink faded but legible. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, it read, Elias Crow, 1948. I sat back, staring at it. This was his journal, his words, hidden under the floor like a secret the house didn't want me to find. My hand shook as I turned the pages, scanning the entries. They started normal enough. Notes about the weather, the town, repairs to the house. But the tone shifted fast. A few pages in, he wrote about experiments, doors to the unseen, and voices in the silence. I flipped ahead, my breath catching as the writing got messier, more frantic. October 12th, 1948. The first ritual worked. I heard them, soft, like whispers through a wall. They know my name now. I'll try again tomorrow. October 15th, 1948. The candles burned too fast. The air turned cold, and the mirror showed something blurred dark. Not me. It moved when I didn't. I need more blood next time. November 3rd, 1948. They're louder now. Footsteps at night, pacing the attic. I didn't call them here. I opened the door and they came through. They watched me. I feel it. I stopped, my mouth dry. Footsteps in the attic. Cold air. Watching. It was too close, too exact. I kept reading, pages trembling in my hands. November 10th, 1948. The basement hums. Something's down there, scraping, waiting. I lock the door, but it doesn't matter. The mirror shows more now. Shapes, eyes, things I can't name. I shouldn't have done this. November 15th, 1948. They won't leave. I hear my name, whispered from the walls. The cold follows me, touches me. I try to close it, burn the symbols, but it's too late. They're here. They're mine. The last entry was undated. Just a scrawl across the page. It sees me. It knows. I can't stop it. I close the book, my chest tight. Elias Crow hadn't just messed with occult books. He'd opened something, invited something into this house. And it was still here. The footsteps, the moans, the shadow. They matched his words too perfectly to be coincidence. I sat there, journal in my lap, staring at the empty room. The house was silent, but it felt alive now, like it was listening, waiting for me to figure it out. I didn't know what to do with it. Burn it? Hide it again? Take it to Clara? I settled on keeping it close. I slid it under the couch cushion downstairs, where I could grab it fast if I needed to. Part of me wanted to read more, to understand what he'd done. But another part screamed to get out, to leave the house and never look back. I couldn't, though. Not yet. I had nowhere else to go, and running wouldn't explain the cold spots or the shadow on the stairs. The day dragged on, and I stayed busy, cleaning the kitchen, unpacking a few boxes, anything to keep my mind off the journal. But it pulled at me, tugging like a loose thread. By evening, I gave in. I pulled it out, sat on the couch with the lamp on, and read it cover to cover. The early entries were dull. Elias complaining about leaky pipes, a nosy neighbor, the cost of lumber. Then came the shift. He'd found a book, some old tome with forbidden rites, and started experimenting. Candles, chalk symbols, drops of his own blood smeared on a mirror. He wrote about crossing the veil, hearing voices, feeling presences. At first, he was excited, proud, even. Then the fear crept in. The rituals got bigger, messier. He described carving symbols into the basement walls, chanting words he barely understood, watching the mirror for hours. The voices turned to footsteps, the presences to shadows. He thought he could control it, close it, but the last pages were chaos. Ink smudged, words overlapping, pleas to make it stop. He'd open a door, he said, and something had walked through, something that wouldn't leave. I finished around midnight. The house dark except for the lamp's glow. The journal sat heavy in my hands, and I felt eyes on me, not from a room, but from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. I stood, shoving it back under the cushion, and checked the locks. Front door, back door, windows. The chair stayed under the basement knob, the box of books on top. I wasn't taking chances. I settled onto the couch, flashlight close, and waited. The footsteps started right on cue. Thud, 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 slow and heavy in the attic. I didn't look up. I knew the pattern now. Knew they'd circle for an hour or two before fading. The tapping came next, sharp and quick, darting along the walls. I gripped the flashlight, staring at the lamp, willing it to stay steady. Then it stopped. All of it, the footsteps, the tapping, gone in an instant. The silence was worse, thick and suffocating, like the house was holding its breath. I sat up, scanning the room. Nothing moved, nothing creaked. Just the hum of the fridge and my own uneven breathing. I waited, tense, expecting the moan or the scraping to kick in. Nothing. Minutes ticked by, 5, 10, 20. The silence stretched unnatural, pressing against my ears. I stood, flashlight in hand, and took a step toward the kitchen. That's when I felt it. The cold, not a spot this time, but a wave, rolling over me from head to toe. My breath fogged, sharp and white, and the lamp flickered, dimming to a dull yellow. I swung the flashlight around, beam cutting through the dark, but the room was empty. The cold tightened, like fingers wrapping around my arms, my chest. I stumbled back, hitting the couch, and the lamp went out. Pop, just like that, plunging the room into shadow. The flashlight beam shook in my hand, throwing jagged light across the walls. Something moved. Not a shadow this time, but blur, fast and low, darting from the stairs to the kitchen. I aimed a light at it, but it was gone, leaving just the empty hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I backed toward the front door, flashlight sweeping the room. The cold followed, clinging to me, frosting my breath. I grabbed the doorknob, locked, still locked, and fumbled with the bolt. It wouldn't turn, stuck tight, like the house didn't want me to leave. I yanked harder, cursing under my breath, and it finally gave, the door swinging open to the night air. I stepped onto the porch, gulping warm spring breeze, flashlight still on. The cold stopped at the threshold, like it couldn't cross. I stood there, shaking, staring back into the dark living room. The lamp flickered back on, weak but steady, casting a faint glow. Nothing moved inside, no blur, no shadow, just the couch and the stairs and the basement door, still barricaded. I didn't go back in right away. I sat on the porch steps, flashlight aimed at the yard, listening to crickets and the distant hum of a car. The house loomed behind me, silent again, but I felt it, those eyes, that presence, watching from somewhere inside. The journal, I confirmed it. Elias Crow had done something, opened something, and it was still here, with me. After an hour, maybe two, I went back inside. The cold was gone, the lamp steady, the silence normal, or as normal as it got. I locked the door, checked the basement barricade, and sat on the couch, flashlight in my lap. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The journal was under the cushion, inches away, and I kept hearing his words. They're here. They're mine. Morning came slow, gray light filtering through the windows. I checked the house. Traps empty, lamp bulb intact. No frost on the knob. Everything looked fine, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Elias Crow had left more than a journal in this house. He'd left a curse, a door, something alive and awake. And now I'd found it, or it had found me. I had to know more. Not just what he'd done, but how to stop it. If I could. The journal was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed the rest. The mirror, the basement, the truth. Assuming I could face it without losing my mind. Here's Chapter 6 of your horror story. Continuing the first-person narrative with suspense, atmosphere, and an escalation of the supernatural presence. It's approximately 3,000 words, as requested, and focuses on the house growing more hostile, pushing the protagonist's fear and resolve to new heights. Enjoy. Chapter 6, The Escalation. I didn't touch the journal again that day. It stayed under the couch cushion, out of sight but heavy on my mind, like a loaded gun I wasn't ready to pick up. The house felt different after I'd read it. Darker, even in the morning light, like the walls had soaked up Elias Crow's words and were whispering them back. I kept busy, scrubbing the kitchen counter, rearranging boxes, anything to avoid thinking about the footsteps, the cold, that blur darting across the room. But it didn't work. Every creak, every shadow made me flinch. I went back to work, figuring routine might steady me. Mike grunted a "glad you're not dead" when I walked in, and I managed a weak smile, diving into stacking lumber and ringing up customers. The store was loud, drills buzzing, carts rattling, voices overlapping. And for a few hours, it drowned out the noise in my head. But my hands shook when I handed over change, and I caught myself staring at the exit, half expecting someone to follow me from the house. Nobody noticed, or if they did, they didn't say anything. Small blessings. By the time I got home, the sun was dipping low, painting the house in shades of orange and gray. I stood on the porch for a minute, keys in hand, staring at the door. It looked normal, peeling paint, warped wood, nothing sinister, but I knew better now. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it again, the bolt clicking loud in the quiet. The air smelled sour, sharper than usual, like something had burned and lingered. I flicked on the lamp, checked the basement barricade, chair and box still in place, and settled onto couch. Flashlight closed, journal hidden, routine intact. Night fell fast, and the house woke up. The footsteps started, thud, 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 steady and slow in the attic. I sat still, staring at the ceiling, counting them like always. The tapping followed, quick and sharp, skittering along the walls. I didn't bother with the flashlight. It never showed anything worth seeing. I waited for the moan, the scraping, the cold. They'd come. I knew they would. It was a pattern now. The house's way of reminding me I wasn't alone. But tonight was different. The footsteps didn't fade after an hour. They got louder, heavier, like someone was stomping instead of pacing. Thud, thud, thud. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, fine and gray, settling on the coffee table. I brushed it off, heart kicking up, and stood. The tapping turned to banging, sharp, rhythmic knocks, not just on the walls of the windows, the stairs, the front door. I swung the flashlight around, beam bouncing, but the room was empty, just me and the noise. Then the basement door slammed, hard, a single explosive crack that shook the kitchen. I spun, light aimed at it, and saw the chair tip, wobbling before settling back. The box of books slid an inch, then stopped. My breath caught, foggy in front of me as the air turned cold. Not patches this time, but full drop, like I'd stepped into a freezer. The lamp flickered, dimming, and the banging spread, a chorus of fists pounding the house from every direction. I backed toward the couch, flashlight shaking, shouting, "Stop it!" My voice cracked, swallowed by the noise. The basement door slammed again, bam, and the chair tipped over, crashing to the floor. The box slid off, books spilling across the tiles. I froze, staring as the knob rattled, fast and violent, like something was trying to get out. The sour smell sharpened, burning my nose, and I gagged, covering my mouth. The lamp went out, pop, and the room plunged into dark, just the flashlight's beam cutting through. The banging stopped, sudden and total, leaving a ringing silence. I stood there, panting, light train on the basement door. The knob was still, the chair on its side, books splayed like broken wings. The cold lingered, my breath puffing white, but the air felt heavier now, thick with that burnt match stink. I didn't move for a long time. When I did, it was slow, deliberate, resetting the chair and stacking the books back on top. The knob was cold, frosted again, like last night, but I didn't touch it long enough to care. I grabbed the journal from under the cushion, clutching it like a shield, and sat back down. The house was quiet, but it wasn't calm. It was waiting. I flipped through the pages, scanning Elias's scrawl for answers. They're louder now. Footsteps at night. The basement hums. They're here. His words matched too well. Too exact. Whatever he'd called, whatever he'd let in, it was angry tonight. I kept reading past the rituals, past the fear, looking for a way out. He'd tried to close it, he wrote, burn the symbols, smash the candles, but it hadn't worked. Too late, he'd scrawled. They're mine. The footsteps start again. Thud, 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 but faster, erratic, like someone running. I slammed the journal shut, standing, flashlight aimed at the ceiling. Dust rained down, thicker now, coated my hair, my shoulders. The banging kicked back in, not everywhere this time, but focused. Bam, bam, bam. On the front door, I swung the light toward it, heart in my throat. The bolt held, but the wood groaned, splintering at the edges. Leave me alone. I yelled, voice hoarse. The banging stopped mid-strike, and the silence hit like a punch. The cold tightened, wrapping around me, and I heard it. A laugh, short, sharp, like a bark, coming from the attic. I aimed the flashlight up, beam shaking, and the laugh came again, louder, bouncing off the walls. It wasn't human. Not quite. Too hollow. Too wrong. I bolted for the stairs, journal under my arm, flashlight leading the way. I didn't know what I was doing, just that I couldn't sit there, couldn't wait for it to come to me. The bedroom was cold, the air biting my skin, but I kept going, pulling down the attic ladder with a squeal that echoed. The laugh stopped, and I climbed, heart hammering, light piercing the dark above. The attic was the same, insulation, cobwebs, those scratch marks, but the air was thick, heavy with that sour, burnt smell. I swept the flashlight across the floor, and the scratches caught the light, deeper now, fresher, like they'd been carved last night. I knelt, running my fingers over them. They were wet, slick with something dark that smeared on my skin. I yanked my hand back, wiping it on my jeans, and stood, beam darting around. Nothing. No one. Just the scratches and the silence. The ladder creaked behind me, and I spun, light hitting the opening. Empty. But the sound came again, creak, creak, like someone climbing slow. I leaned over, aiming the beam down. The hallway was dark, the lamp still out, but I saw it, a flicker, a blur, moving past the bedroom door. I scrambled back, nearly tripping, and the ladder creaked louder, faster. Something was coming up. I didn't think. I grabbed the ladder, yanked it up, and slammed the hatch shut, plunging the attic into black except for my flashlight. The creaking stopped, but I heard it, breathing low and ragged, right below the hatch. I backed away, light fixed on the wood, waiting. The breathing grew louder, wetter, like air through a clogged pipe, and the hatch rattled once, twice, then went still. I stood there, frozen, journal clutched to my chest, flashlight trembling. The breathing faded, and the cold eased, leaving just the attic's normal chill. I waited 5 minutes, 10, until the silence felt safe, or as safe as it could. I lowered the ladder, slow and quiet, and climbed down, light sweeping the hallway. Empty. The bedroom was empty. 2, the mattress untouched, the window locked. Downstairs, the lamp was back on, glowing weak but steady. The chair and books were still by the basement door, undisturbed. I didn't go near it. I sank onto the couch, journal in my lap, flashlight on the table, and stared at the ceiling. The footsteps didn't come back. The tapping didn't start. The house was quiet. Too quiet, like it had spent all its energy and was resting now. I didn't trust it. I kept the light on, the journal close, and waited for morning. When the sun came up, I checked the attic again. The scratches were there, still wet, still dark, but no footprints, no signs of anything else. The ladder was fine, the hatch unmarred. Downstairs, the front door showed cracks from the banging, but the bolt held. The basement knob was frosted, the chair steady. Everything looked normal, except it wasn't. I sat with the journal, rereading the last pages. They're mine. Too late. Elias hadn't stopped it. He'd lived with it, or died with it, depending on who you believed. I didn't know how to close whatever he'd opened, didn't know if I could, but the house was done playing subtle. The laughs, the banging, the breathing, it was hostile now, pushing me, testing me. I couldn't keep sleeping downstairs, couldn't keep jumping at every sound. I called Clara that morning, voice shaking as I told her about the night, the door, the attic, the scratches. She didn't laugh, didn't doubt me. "Get out," she said, firm and quick. "Stay here till you figure out. That house isn't safe." "I can't," I said, gripping the phone. "I need to know what's happening. I found something, his journal. Elias Crow's. It's real, Clara. He did something here." She went quiet, then sighed. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that. Just don't wait till it's too late. My door's open." I hung up, staring at the journal. She was right. I could leave, crash at her place, figure out from a distance. But running felt like giving up, like letting it win. I'd found the journal. I'd felt it, heard it, seen it. I wasn't crazy. Whatever Elias had unleashed, it was here, and I was in it now. I had to face it, or it'd follow me. Elias's words hinted at that much. I decided then, no more couch, no more waiting. I'd sleep in the bedroom tonight. Ladder down, journal close. If it came for me, I'd see it, really see it, and figure out what it wanted. Or I'd die trying. Either way, I was done hiding. I couldn't sit still after that night. The house had gone quiet again. Too quiet, like it was catching its breath. But I wasn't waiting for it to start up again. The journal wasn't enough anymore. Elias Crow's words were a map with no destination. I needed more. Facts, not just his ramblings. If he'd done something to this house, something that stuck, there had to be a record somewhere. I grabbed my keys, the journal, and headed out, locking the door behind me like it could keep whatever was inside from following. The town library was a squat brick building downtown, a 10-minute drive from the house. It smelled like old paper and dust when I walked in, the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 80s. A librarian, gray hair, glasses on a chain, looked up from her desk as I approached, her smile fading when she saw my face. I must have looked rough, eyes red from no sleep, hands twitchy from too much coffee. "I need old newspapers," I said, keeping my voice low, "from the 40s and 50s. Anything on a guy named Elias Crow." She raised an eyebrow but nodded, pointing me to a back room with microfiche machines. "Everything's on film. You know how to use it." "Yeah," I lied, figuring I'd work it out. She handed me a box of reels labeled by year, and I hauled them to a machine in the corner, away from the handful of people flipping through books. The screen flickered to life, grainy and green, as I loaded the first reel. 1948, the year Elias started his journal. It took an hour to find him. The articles were small at first, mentions of a reclusive carpenter building the house, buying odd supplies, keeping to himself. Then came the obit, November 20th, 1948. Elias Crow, 43, found dead in his home. Apparent suicide by hanging. No family, no services. Short, cold, like he'd never mattered. But a week later, a bigger piece caught my eye. Strange noises plagued neighborhood. Neighbors reported screams, high, awful, echoing from the house, days after his death. The sheriff investigated, found nothing, blamed it on wind or grief. One quote stuck out. "It sounded like he was still in there, begging to get out," said a woman named Margaret Hale. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. Screams after he was dead. That matched Clara's story, and it lined up with the journal. They're here. They're mine. I kept digging, flipping through 49, 50, looking for more. Scatter reports popped up. Tenants moving in, moving out fast, complaining about noises, shadows, cold. A 1953 piece mentioned a man hospitalized after hysterical ravings about the house, claiming something chased him out. No names, no follow-ups. The town seemed to shrug it off, chalking it up to drunks or bad wiring. The librarian wandered over as I loaded another reel, her shadow falling across the screen. "Finding what you need?" she asked, voice soft but curious. "Yeah," I said, not looking up, just researching an old house. "Which one?" She leaned closer, peering at the screen. I hesitated, then muttered, "The one on Elm, 2-story, been empty a while." Her face tightened, lips pressing into a thin line. "Crow's place. You live there?" I nodded, and she stepped back, crossing her arms. "Be careful with that one. People talk, say it's cursed. I don't believe in ghosts, but I've seen folks leave the house looking like you do now. Worn out, scared. You know anything about it?" I asked, turning to face her. She shrugged, but her eyes flicked away. "Just rumors. Elias was odd, kept strange books, stayed up all night. After he died, it never settled. Tenants, noises, stories. Some things are better left alone." "Thanks," I said, turning back to the machine. She lingered a moment, then walked off, leaving me with a hum of the microfiche and a sinking feeling. The rumors weren't just Clara's gossip. They were in print, etched into the town's memory. Elias had done something, and it hadn't died with him. I kept going, skimming through decades. The house stayed troubled, tenants fleeing, brief mentions of unexplained disturbances, but nothing concrete, no answers. By the time I hit the 90s, my head ached and the screen blurred. I shut it off, grabbed the journal, and stepped outside. The sun was low, air cool, but it didn't shake the chill clinging to me. Back home, the house waited, dark and silent. I locked the door, checked the basement barricade, still in place, and sat on the couch, journal open, the librarian's warning mixed with Elias's words. The basement hums. They watched me. I'd heard the hum, the moans, felt the eyes. It wasn't imagination. It was history, repeating itself. Night came, and I stayed downstairs, lamp on, flashlight ready. The footsteps started, thud, 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 louder than usual, shaking the ceiling. Dust fell, and I coughed, waving it away. The tapping turned to bangs, sharp and fast, rattling the windows. I stood, light in hand, as the basement door slammed. Once, twice, knocking the chair aside. The box of books slid, crashing to the floor. The air went cold, my breath fogging, and the lamp flickered out. I swung the flashlight around, beam catching a blur, tall, thin, darting past the stairs. I shouted, "What do you want?" But it was gone, leaving silence. The cold tightened, and I heard it, whispers, soft and garbled, coming from the walls. My name, maybe, or just noise. I backed toward the door, but the whispers followed, circling me. I didn't run. I stood there, flashlight shaking, listening as the whispers faded. The lamp flickered back on, weak but steady, and the cold lifted. The house went quiet. No footsteps, no bangs, just the fridge's hum. I reset the chair, stacked the books, and sat, journal in my lap. The blur, the whispers, they were real, tied to Elias, to whatever he'd called here. I flipped to the last pages, rereading his panic. I tried to close it, but it's too late. He'd failed, died, and left it behind. The library confirmed it. Screams, tenants, decades of fear. I wasn't imagining this. It was awake, angry, and it knew I was digging. I couldn't stop now. I had to know more. Had to find the mirror, the symbols, something to fight it. That night, I dreamed of the attic. A figure stood there, faceless, tall, reaching for me with hands that weren't hands, long, blurred, like smoke. I woke on the couch, sweating, flashlight still on. The house was silent, but I felt it, eyes watching from the dark. I grabbed the journal, clutching it tight, and decided tomorrow I'd check the basement. If Elias had left clues, that's where they'd be. I just hoped I'd make it through the night. Since you requested to end the story after Chapter 7's shortened version, I'll wrap it up here with a final chapter that ties together the narrative threads, delivers a climactic encounter, and ends on an ambiguous note as per your original instructions. This will be Chapter 12, skipping ahead from Chapter 7, condensed to around 1,500 words to match the shorter format of Chapter 7, while still providing a suspenseful, chilling conclusion. Here we go. Chapter 12, The Lingering. I couldn't wait anymore. The house wasn't just creaking or groaning. It was alive, angry, and I'd had enough. The journal, the library, the whispers, they all pointed to the basement. Elias Crow had started something down there. Carved symbols, spilled blood, opened a door. If I was going to end this, that's where I'd find it, or where it'd find me. I waited until morning, when the house felt less hostile, and grabbed what I could, a flashlight, a crowbar from the hardware store, the journal tucked under my arm. The basement door loomed in the kitchen, chair and books still wedged against it. I kicked them aside, the crash loud and quiet, and turned the knob. It was cold, frostbite in my fingers, but gave easily, swinging open to a dark stairwell. The air smelled wet and sharp, like copper and rot, stronger than before. I descended, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom. The basement was the same, concrete walls, dirt floor, water heater humming, but it felt wrong, heavier, like the shadows were watching. I aimed the light at the far wall, where the moans had come from. It looked solid, cracked but unremarkable. Then I saw them, faint lines etched into the concrete, barely visible under dust and grime. Symbols, just like Elias described, jagged loops, sharp angles, smeared with something dark that flaked off when I touched it. I opened the journal, flipping to his ritual pages, carved the signs, spoke the words, gave the blood. This was it. His door. The flashlight trembled as I traced the symbols, matching them to his sketches. They weren't random. They formed a rough circle, big enough for a man to stand in. I stepped back, heart pounding, and the air shifted, cold, sudden, wrapping around me like a fist. My breath fogged, and the flashlight flickered, dimming to a dull glow. The moan started, low, guttural, rising from the wall. I swung the crowbar, ready to smash the symbols, but the sound turned to whispers, my name, clear and sharp, echoing in the tight space. Leave it, they hissed, overlapping, a dozen voices at once. I froze, light shaking, as the wall rippled. Not concrete anymore, but something soft, pulsing like flesh. A crack split it, black and wet, and something moved inside, long, thin, reaching. I swung the crowbar, slamming it into the symbols. Concrete chipped, dust flew, and the whispers turned to screams. High, piercing, rattling my skull. The crack widened, and it came through. A figure, tall and blurred, edges smearing into the dark. No face, just a void where one should have been, and hand that stretched too long, clawing toward me. The cold burned, the flashlight died, and I swung again, hitting the wall, the thing, anything. It grabbed me, icy fingers on my arm, pulling, dragging me toward the crack. I screamed, thrashing, and jammed the crowbar into its grip. It let go with a wet snap, and I stumbled back, falling against the stairs. The wall pulsed faster, the screams deafening, and I saw it. Eyes in the void, dozens blinking, staring. You're mine! It rasped, voice like gravel, and lunged. I ran, up the stairs, crowbar banging against the steps, into the kitchen. The house shook, doors slamming, windows rattling, footsteps thundering overhead. I grabbed my keys, bolted the front door, and yanked it open. The thing was behind me. I felt it, cold and heavy, brushing my neck, but I didn't look back. I threw myself onto the porch, sunlight hitting me like a lifeline, and the cold stopped, pinned at the threshold. I didn't stop running. Down the sidewalk, past Clara's house, to my car. I drove, hands shaking, until I hit a motel 2 towns over, the kind with flickering signs and stained carpets. I checked in, collapsed on the bed, and stared at the ceiling, crowbar still in my grip. The journal was gone, left in the basement maybe, and I didn't care. I'd seen it, felt it, fought it. That was enough. That night, I heard it, a creak, faint but sharp, like floorboard settling. I sat up, heart racing, and grabbed the crowbar. The motel room was dark, the curtains still, but the creak came again, closer. I flicked on the lamp. Nothing, just me, the bed, the peeling wallpaper. I didn't sleep. Days later, I called Clara from a payphone, voice rough. I'm out, I said. Left the house. It's done. Good, she said, relief in her tone. You okay? No, I admitted, but I'm alive. She paused and added, someone new moved in yesterday. Young guy, seemed eager. Left this morning, though. Ran out screaming about footsteps. Guess it's still there. I hung up, staring at the phone. Still there. Of course it was. I'd smashed the symbols, fought the thing. But Elias's door wasn't closed. It was cracked, leaking, waiting. I moved back to my old town, found a cheap apartment, and tried to start over. The job was gone, the house abandoned. But I kept the crowbar by my bed, just in case. Months passed, and the noises stopped. No footsteps, no whispers, no cold. I told myself it was over, that I'd escaped. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear it. A faint creak, a soft tap, like the house hadn't forgotten me. I'd grip the crowbar, check the locks, and wait for morning. Nothing came, not yet, but I felt it. Eyes in the dark, patient, lingering. Clara sent me a letter once, months later. The house was empty again, she wrote, but kids dared each other go inside now. Came back pale and quiet. The town called it haunted, a legend growing roots. She'd burned sage, prayed, but it didn't matter. Whatever Elias Crow had called, it was still there, waiting for the next tenant, the next fool. I burned the letter, scattered the ashes, and moved again, farther this time, a city where old houses were rare and the air didn't smell of rot. I don't sleep much, don't trust the dark. The creaks are gone, but the fear isn't. I hear my name sometimes, soft and distant, in the wind or the hum of the fridge. I don't answer. I just hold the crowbar tighter and wait, knowing it's out there, somewhere, watching, whispering, ready for me to slip.